To ask Silan about in 2012 you organized a kind of demonstration protest for against Operation Spectrum, right? That was the 25th anniversary. Can you tell us how that came about?
Um, that event, yeah, that event was held at Speaker's Corner, and it was a memorial event for the detainees of Operation Spectrum back in '87. And how it came about was, I think, really a lot of the things that you see that I presented on were very organic. We've never been like an organized. We're not an NGO. Me and all the people who were involved at that time, and we were just a group of concerned young citizens who were learning about our nation's history, contemporary politics, and responding to it. So really, it came about just discussing casually amongst each other and knowing that this anniversary was coming up, and Speaker's Corner had been used for many other things like Pink Dot and other demonstrations, but um, not an event to specifically focus on this, on the detainees of the so-called Marxist conspiracy. So we decided to do it, and yeah, so really the answer is it was like many other things, spontaneous.
Um, any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, right, like in the past, I mean, this is just a general question for everyone. In the past, very very long ago, we had very fierce student unions, which student unions are now not allowed in Singapore. But what do you think is makes the Singapore students different from the Hong Kong students, and what could I mean? I guess what could we learn to do better?
Yes, I was just having a conversation actually with Joshua as Kirsten was speaking. We were just talking over Skype, and he was saying how people in Singapore are depressed on how hard it is to organize students. But
Mm.
in Hong Kong, people are depressed that the political system can't change. Yeah, so we're all depressed about two different things, and I think this also comes to the heart of your question. We see in
Yeah.
Hong Kong, for instance, the ability to mobilize thousands and thousands. Yeah, but then yet in Singapore, we don't have that kind of situation. So, but we used to, right? We used to have this during the 50s and the 60s. There were very massive social movements. So how can we? So your question basically is how do we move closer to that? And I think Kirsten has also talked a little bit about how we can, but the process of change just seems to be so slow. So I wonder if like Joshua or Seelan, you have any comments about that?
I was well, the echo sound. Uh, okay. Let me handle. Okay. I would say that the situation in Hong Kong is quite different with Singapore. In Hong Kong, before 2011, none of the student will be the organizer of social movement. But in Hong Kong, due to I have mentioned about the June 4th, the Tiananmen Square incident, candle night, or the rally on every year anniversary of Hanover, uh, it's quite common for some or minority group of high school students to join in to be the participants of rally and demonstration already. Even parents may think it's danger on or some of the classmates will laugh at them, but it's not really sensitive things already. But I know the situation in Singapore is quite different. So I can just say that um, compared to Singapore, of course, Hong Kong can have certain may have higher degree of rights of assembly and freedom of expression. But also, if you guys may think that people in Singapore are quite depressed, I would say that in Hong Kong, the young generation are more depressed after the umbrella movement. Try to imagine after Hong Kong people have organized the largest movement in Hong Kong or even in China history. Uh, yeah, with total number of participants, maybe 1 million people have joined, participate, or support in the umbrella movement and occupy on the road for 79 days. But after the movement, things remain unchanged. What I mean is, before and after the umbrella movement, the political system is still remain unchanged. It means that nothing we gain in the movement, and people really feel downhearted and depressed, and hey, hard to build the solidarity or strengthen the civil society again. But I would just say that uh, I learned a lesson is for uh, fight against the semi-authoritarian regime is just a long-term battle. Every movement is important, but don't expect just through one specific action or movement can change whole of the system immediately. So if we have adjust our perception or expectation, it will strengthen our passion and courage and to continue. So it will be the situation that we face. So after the umbrella movement, it's hard to organize any social movement more than 100,000 people anymore. It's the limitation we face in Hong Kong. But at least we can still through social media and Facebook, Instagram, or even Snapchat to be the communication channel and to deliver the message to the young generation and still maintain their concern or care in social justice. Even it's hard to mobilize them to join into Occupy or civil disobedience in the recent year. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I also think it's about. I mean, in Singapore, I guess the complication, from what I know, it's also continuity, in the sense of, I have friends from Hong Kong as well who've been involved in the democratic movement, student movements, and even in the political parties. And what they used to tell me maybe 12 years ago was that when I shared about demonstrations in Singapore and the kind of repression, they said, oh well, in Hong Kong, yeah, we are under a kind of special rule, but we have demonstrations every day. It's visible. It's almost like it's like you're going down and you see somebody selling things. And it's the idea of visibility and continuity. So when you actually have the umbrella protest, the students don't. They're used to seeing this. It's not something that's totally out of their reality, their visual frame or their mental frame, right? Whereas in Singapore, you tell there's a demonstration. Uh, it took a few years even to normalize Speaker's Corner and the demonstrations that were been happening in it. And it start like you get 20 people, 30 people coming, and then now you have huge events there as well. But also in terms of student activism or activism in general, right? In Singapore, you had a wave of arrests and detention without trial, which was, I think, strategically meant to destroy this continuity, right? So in the 60s, you had Operation Cold Store, and then in the 70s, you had another set of arrests. And in the 80s, you also had another set of, the Operation Spectrum. And then after that, there was a there was also a JB Jeyaretnam right after that, who was who was completely repressed and not in parliament anymore. And then Dr. Chee Soon Juan came up in the 90s, and he was also completely destroyed in the press, his reputation. Um, yeah, and so after the 90s, after what happened to Dr. Chi, I think it was around the year 2000 when some of us were reading a lot of things online, and we wanted to organize, or we wanted to just discuss things, rather than just stay online, and we wanted to do something. But we felt that we were starting from zero. Like, back then you have the Think Center website, and then you have one or two blogs, and there's some forums. But we had to start from zero, and a lot of the inspiration for me and my colleagues came from places like Malaysia, came from places like Indonesia and Philippines, not the West actually. Um, yeah, and now we have Speakers Corner, which is a space where anybody can organize events for a variety of causes, and I think that's a progression really. Without Okay, without the civil disobedience that Dr. Chi Soon Juan and his colleagues were pushing in the 90s and the 2000s, you wouldn't have an increasing movement, especially with the youth like us joining this kind of movement, and independently then organizing ourselves these kinds of activities. And this push, I believe, is what also contributed to Speaker's Corner being opened up to demonstrations and banner and placards, because they took us off the streets and they gave us a space, and then everybody used the space, and so did we. Like even today, I meet some of my old friends and they tell me like, "Oh, Silan, ever since you started working for regional NGO, and ever since like Speaker's Corner was liberalized, there's no more civil disobedience," and it's kind of true. But I am not going to come and say, uh, I'm going to follow up on what Kirsten said. I'm not going to come and say, oh, now everybody's just pushing the Speaker's Corner and they're all cowards, or we were cowards too. We were extremely afraid when we started out. Even to meet up and discuss things, we were afraid. And I see it more as an evolution. At least now, demonstrations are being normalized through Speaker's Corner, and at least that idea is being spread into society. Whether or not it evolves into something else depends on the time and condition.
I think we also can look at different ways of resistance, so different acts of resistance, and at the most basic level, uh, recollection and history is an act of resistance. So the official history textbooks do not mention Operation Coastal or Operation Spectrum. They do not go into the details. They might say things like, okay, Lee Kuan Yew did a work with communists, and then after we got independence, he turned around on the communists, and that was what he had to do. And that's all I remember from my school history textbook, that he needed to do what he had to do, and that was done. Moving on. But so if that's not included in the official narrative, learning about it is an act of resistance. Refusing to forget it is an act of resistance. Knowing that this happened and that it has repercussions on how we see ourselves today is an act of resistance. I was every year during Chinese New Year, the old left, so the student activists and the unionists who were active in the 50s and 60s, they gather for a reunion lunch, and it's a huge lunch. Like it's really impressive that all these people who are like now 70 and 80 and don't use Facebook can mobilize larger numbers than we can. And that their 60th anniversary lunch was like 800 people in like this big like Chinese banquet thing, and I see that a lot of them see it as just reunion. Meet your friends once a year. Everyone is so old now. Some have to come in wheelchair, but I feel that the gathering itself is an act of resistance, because they meet and then they sing their songs from their school days, and they sing like "Solidarity is Forever," and they sing all these songs that they remember, and they talk about. They publish books. So every year when they meet, they will publish like a letter or a book or a collection of photos about their activism. And I do see it as resistance, because they are putting it back. The story that they were part of, that was cut out of the narrative, they're putting it back. And I think for young Singaporeans, it's really eye-opening to look at all that material, because it's really a history of activism that the first time I saw it, when I went to that lunch and I looked at the books and everything, I got really upset, because it felt so just outrageous that this is a history of my country and my people and my fellow citizens, and this is a history of our power that has been taken away from us. And like I wasn't alive at that period, but it really was impactful, because it felt that something had been taken away from me, that I come from a country that has this great history of activism, and that was taken away. And so I think for us to remember that is important as well.
I think one of the challenges we face here is that even going for a legal protest or organizing one is something which people don't are even scared to do or don't even want to go. I recall a few years ago when I organized a solidarity vigil for Bursay. This was in 2012, and the police were crawling all over Hong Lim Park, and it is things like this, which make people very afraid and scared to attend these events. And also 2 years ago when we organized a solidarity vigil for the Occupy Central protesters. Yeah, again, the police called us up for investigations. And I don't know what happened to the Hong Kong students who participated. I suspect they were deported, or their employment passes or their student visas got revoked. Yeah, but they didn't seem to care because they were happily protesting, at the event, and that was one of the reasons I got into trouble, because I was said to have allowed foreigners to participate in the solidarity vigil. So, so it's things like that which make it very difficult, for Singaporeans to want to come forward and even to organize these things, because the police intimidation is there. So it seems like the Singapore approach is to have a picnic, right? If you look at how successful Pink Dot is, right? Everyone's happy to go to Pink Dot, wear pink, and party and have eat pink muffins and pink cakes, as a show of solidarity. I mean, I think it's a great movement. Yeah, I'm not. I say this not to criticize Pink Dot, but it seems like in Singapore there are certain ways in which we do our activism, and we don't seem to like these very confrontational civil disobedience types of actions. So how do we get there? I think this is the $1 million question, right? Step by step, do we let many pink dots to happen and then slowly we transition there, or do we need to have a bunch of individuals come together and really hammer on in the civil disobedience so that we open the space in the same way that people like Seelan, Dr. Chi Soon Juan, and all that did 10 years ago. Yeah. So this is something for us to think about. You want to add something, Seelan?
Yeah, just adding on to it, um, about the process, right? How do we get there? I think it was 9 or 10 years ago as well, where I made a trip to South Korea and I was in Seoul, and I went there for a conference, and it was a busy shopping district, right? And I was walking through, and everybody was shopping, and so was I. Um, and then something caught my eye. It was a group of students. There's like 3 students in school uniform, high school, uh, and they set up a table and they put up a banner saying "No to nuclear power" or something like that. And they were just giving out some flyers and talking to people on the street, and no one was offended by it. The police weren't there to stop it, and the students were expressing themselves, and I just looked at it and I was like, oh, this is why can't we do this in Singapore? Like, why don't we have this kind of thing? So, and it was a simple act, but it felt quite inspirational in a sense. So a while later, we organized a similar thing on the death penalty. So we were campaigning on the death penalty, and then we printed a simple banner, just a stand-up banner. And then we made flyers about the death penalty and about certain cases, and we were just handing it out in Orchard Road. And we did it a number of times. But there was one incident where suddenly the police arrived, and it was just me and one other person with a banner and giving out flyers about the death penalty. It's not even about the Singapore government or the PAP, and a band of police arrived. There were like 8 to 9 officers, and they said you have to leave in the next 5 minutes or we will arrest you. But the person I was with was much younger than I, or rather new to activism. So I said, okay, let's pack up and go, because I didn't want to, get people, yeah. So so you see, it's like a mirror, right? We do the same thing. We're just handing out information, and that's a problem. And it's also about a sense of belonging. Those Korean students who did that, they set up a table and talked about nuclear power and the environment because they care about the environment, because they care about their country. They feel like they belong somewhere, like their voice can be heard because they can create their own platforms. But here you cannot. You can't even set up a platform. And how did those students even arrive there? You see, there must have been some syllabus in school. There must have been some teachers in school who talked about this issue. There must have been some civil society group or NGO that went to the school or that met them and inspired them to do this stuff. But in Singapore, you don't have the kind of freedom or the kind of vibrant academia to academic freedom to get students involved that much. But you're all here today and you're quite young, and some students too. So in that sense, like, even if it's just 2 people, like when me and Kai Xiong went out, compared to like 500,000 people in Hong Kong, yeah, I think it's not the issue. I think it's about taking the first step. There's a quote, I forget by who said, when we move, it's a movement.
I'd like to throw it back to the floor. Yes, you have a question? Okay. I'll have to repeat your question so that Joshua can hear through the mic. Yeah. So your question is that there is a fear that prevents people from being actively involved in activism, but then there's also satisfaction with the status quo, right? So when you speak to people who seem to be happy with the status quo, um, yeah, how would you respond? How would you talk to them? Yeah, to convince them of your position, right? Okay, yes. This is a question for all the panelists. So um, um, you want to- yeah, Joshua, would you like to answer that question? You have any thoughts on that? Joshua, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you repeat the question
Okay.
again? Sorry,
Well,
because
I
or
guess in
type
the
to me
Hong
because
Kong
the
context,
echo sound is quite annoying. Yeah, so yeah, can
right?
you repeat
Sure.
again? Sorry.
Okay. Okay. I'll repeat the question and say within the Hong Kong context, because what she's asking is that there are people who are scared to be involved in activism, but at the same time, there are also
Okay.
people who are satisfied with the status quo. So, how would you
Okay.
respond to someone who's either scared or
Okay.
satisfied with the current condition? Yeah, to be involved in your movement.
I would say that most of the Hong Kongers, uh, or I think even some of the people in Singapore, may not interest or even afraid to join into activism, but because they think that maintaining the current status or remain unchanged for the institution, they can still maintain their stable life. But I would just elaborate or explain to them, if you do not fight for human rights and democracy, finally, the current threat will still will erode the existing value of Hong Kong. For example, people in Hong Kong think that with the existence of rule of law, it's not necessary for us to pay the price for fight for democracy. But due to the experience of the bookseller being kidnapped, I just explained to them, if you do not fight for democracy, the rule of law and the rule of law and high degree autonomy of Hong Kong will just eroded by the interference of Communist Party of China. So I would just through the recent development and the news and to hope to let them to recognize the importance to join to activism. Because if even they are not really care about democracy, if they hope to maintain the current institution or not let the institution or the democratization process move backward, it's necessary for them to stand up. Because 20 years ago, before the handover, no one can no one can imagine that people live in Hong Kong could not ensure their personal safety under the basic law. But after the bookseller incident happened, they have kidnapped it from Hong Kong to China. It already implied that if you do not fight or join into activism, the threat will also affect our daily life, not just our political rights.
That this year I learned that there was another like a model of strategy on civil movement strategy, which they called the spectrum of allies. So you kind of look at where people are. So if it's like so it's a spectrum. It's like a semicircle, and on one side you have your active allies, which would be the people that you already work with, people who are already actively supporting you. So that would be the people who would show up at your events and things like that. And it goes from active allies all the way to passive to neutral, then passive opponents and like active opponents. Active opponents would be people who like literally are pushing back against you. Then your neutral is usually like the silent majority in the middle who kind of don't really care either way. And then you have your passive people who don't support you, but they're not really doing anything about it. So I kind of see the people you mentioned as the two separate groups, right? So there will be like the people who are just satisfied, they just don't really think that there is a problem. And then there are the people who do see the problem but are afraid. And I approach these two groups very differently because, and I'm actually at this stage more worried about the people who see the problems and are afraid than the people who are satisfied. Because I think in every country, every society, there will always be a group of people whose main goals are to get their salary, to go shopping, and to eat ice cream, right? So, like, okay, you keep eating your ice cream. So I'm more worried about the people who do see the problem but feel disempowered. Um, and so I guess it's to kind of meet people where they are at. So like if people are satisfied, then I don't expect to like swing them across the spectrum to become like the rah-rah supporter at my event. All I can expect is I'll, I'll present you my argument, I present you what information I have, and I hope you will think about it. And maybe if you think about it, you might go from actively opposing me to kind of, maybe, quietly opposing me, but thinking about it, to going to neutral, and then maybe hopefully over time support me. But all I can do is provide information and hope that that person cares enough about the subject to think about it. Not to support me, but to just think about their own position. For people who are afraid, I think about this a lot, like how to meet people where they are at, find out what they are comfortable with, and then encourage them to decide what you're comfortable with, and then go one or two steps outside that. So it's probably illogical to go to a market auntie who's too scared to go to Hong Lim Park to suggest that she should hunger strike with Ceylon, because she's never gonna go that far, right? So maybe all you can say is, okay, auntie, maybe just come to Hong Lim Park for 2 hours, just stand and see what people are saying. Then you can go home, and if police ask you, you can just say you walk past, nothing to do with you. But just kind of where the person is at, find out what they're comfortable with, and encourage them to like move one or two steps ahead. And I try to do that with myself, like what am I comfortable with, and should I push that a bit more? And I think if like to talk about how do we go back to that sort of activism that we used to have, maybe if everybody kind of did that, we would see a lot more action, because there will be people who are comfortable with a lot more pushing, and then there are people who are less comfortable with things, but they are also pushing in their own ways. So I hope that works.
Any more questions? Oh wow, so now so many. Okay, this guy put up his hand first, so I'll give it to you.
Hi, firstly, thank you for your time coming down and talk to us. My question is quite simple. Okay, as in we hear a lot about the idea of misinformation and the idea that a lot of Singaporeans don't really know what actually is going on. And but there's a lot of good like medium for us, like books and writings and even films that talk about all these issues in Singapore. There is that barrier, which is that it's sort of preaching to the converted. You know, you have to reach out for it yourselves. People who are interested in the idea will find out more, but people who are interested or who don't actually know about it will have very little chance to like look at these kind of problems. And if I think like our education here in Singapore, at least the big parts of it, don't cover these kind of issues, or like don't really cover it in the right way, how then do we get people to like start being interested? So my question, I think I'll direct it first to Joshua, because I mean might have faced a similar situation there in Hong Kong, where the education probably doesn't provide for this kind of awareness. And how does the students in Hong Kong, for example, find out more about these things, and then maybe for the two Singaporeans who are here, whether that will work in Singapore?
So who would like to start? Joshua, did you hear the question clearly?
Pardon? Sorry?
Did you hear the question just now?
Yes, sorry, please repeat again because the sound is too loud and it's really hard for me to.
Okay, I will try to rephrase it. The person who he talked a lot about education, yeah, and how you can empower people through education, because one of the things that stops people from getting involved in activism is the kind of education that they receive. So in the Hong Kong context, how did you and your colleagues, your friends, what was there something in the education system which empowered you to get more involved in activism? Was there something about that?
Okay, yeah, I would say that in Hong Kong, especially with the background with people are from Chinese, yeah, so parents are focusing on the examination results and hope their son or daughters can enter the best university and to be the professionals and to get the upward mobility to be the middle class. So in Hong Kong, the whole of the education system is quite target oriented. People just focus on examination and hope to get a high grade in the examination result and can enter better university. So from primary school to secondary school, every day is just focusing on examination. However, we still see the advantage in the Hong Kong education system. It will be the existence of the subject named as liberal study. Liberal study is a subject in high school and is a compulsory subject for public examination. If so, every high school student, if they apply for the public examination, they need to face the exam on this subject. And if they fail on this subject, they can't reach the bottom line on the basic standard to apply any course from university. And in this liberal studies subject, it's similar to social science and will teach about political rights and even civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, just like the history of Martin Luther King, is also the compulsory school curriculum in Hong Kong education system. And that's the reason why the pro-Beijing politician always hold to uh, cancel liberal study as the list of compulsory subject. And through this compulsory subject, because students hope to pass and even get a better grade and let them enter the popular university. So they would need to put more effort to learn about social issue and to recognize the political system of Hong Kong and youth political participation is also part of the school curriculum in Hong Kong. So I would say that even whole of the momentum or the environment in Hong Kong is not really favorable for students to have any after school participation in civil society due to just a lot of burden and pressure in school. But with the implementation of liberal study, this subject can still encourage students to find out more about FBI. Maybe the starting point for them to recognize on what's going on in the social system. Yeah.
Yes, and I believe it was because the Chinese government wanted to change that
Yeah.
subject, right, which led to you and many of your peers to protest very strongly on the streets. So I think we have very similar systems here too. In Singapore, we also have an education system that's very exam oriented, very goal oriented, in the same way that Joshua has shared about Hong Kong. But I think what's different is that we have a national education system here that is basically government propaganda. Yeah. So and I think that really has a very insidious effect, yeah, on young people's minds. Yeah. So would you all have any comments about that?
Sorry, don't mind if I just clarify or something. I think my question is not really okay, as in as much as it's about the education system, but also like what external from the system, if it's not something that is granted by the education system itself. So like in Hong Kong's case, there is that liberal studies thing that adds these kind of ideas and brings these discussions into the table. But in a country like Singapore, where there is not, where we don't have this access to this kind of, opportunities to talk about it, what could possibly be done to reach out to the people who like not informed?
Yeah, because we don't have like a centralized way to disseminate this sort of information. So I think it really does come down to a lot of personal connections, personal relationships. Like, when you share, if you keep sharing these articles on your Facebook, you cannot expect all your friends to read it, but maybe one or two might. Maybe they'll think about it. Maybe you can like later go to the back and buy all those books and give people for Christmas. For goodness sake, you already give it to them for free. They could at least read it, right? Like, if you bought like Charlie Chan Hock Chai and then gave it to someone for Christmas, or bought Comet in Our Sky and say, read about history, I give this to you. Things like that, personal networks, when you have friends at dinner, bring up the subject, introduce the topic, kind of make it normal to talk about, or just, little ways like that, I suppose, because these networks are important, and people who might be afraid of things are more likely to listen to people they already trust and they already know. So I see that as like a little way to share things.
Yeah, I think those are very practical ways you can get people engaged or interested. But again, looking at observing how other countries, even the region, how they get to that point, even when liberal studies is not a subject, is usually due to youth groups, youth activist groups. So the ones who are already converted, they go around trying to, advocate to other students. And these also involve like political clubs within institutions and schools. And I don't want to comment on political clubs in Singapore.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm conscious of time, so maybe I'll just take the last batch of 3 questions, yeah, and then I'll let the panelists decide which ones they want to answer, yeah. So 3 questions, maybe starting from the back, the lady at the back with the shawl. Yeah, you raised up your hand. Yes. What is your question?
Hello.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if there's a clear answer to my question, but when I think about civil liberty movements, I don't see it as progressing in a straight line. I think there's always that fear of backlash, and that sometimes we often hear people saying, "Oh, don't push too hard because then the backlash will come and it'll be worse than before." So I was just wondering, how do we even decide, what is too much for the current situation? Or is it counterproductive to think about it in that way? Should we just move anyway? And if there's a backlash that we don't expect, then that's just too bad.
Okay. So your question is, how do we deal with a backlash? What if there are fears which impede us from going forward, but at the same time, when you go forward, you might be going 2 steps backwards. So how do we manage and deal with that?
How do you decide
Okay.
whether something is too much for that moment or not?
Okay, okay. Next question. Okay, the guy with the cap behind. And then you here in the corner.
Thank you. So my question is for Joshua quite specifically. You first came to prominence protesting the introduction of national education in schools in Hong Kong. What did you see about the national education system, education curricula that was being pushed, that was so dangerous, that you really wanted to resist?
So the question to Joshua is, what did you see about the national education system that was so objectionable that you had to resist it? Yeah, okay, just one more. I'll just get one more person to ask a question and then we can answer.
Hello. My question is a question for the audience and for the panelists. The proletariat always suffers, and we don't see, and we always seem to be not recognizing the systemic changes that are at play. And I had this idea for a platform, CityPoll. CityPoll allows people to vote on social issues and policy decisions. Therefore, we eliminate elected representation in parliament. So we represent ourselves. We have Singapore, 3.5 million people. 3.5 million people will all be parliamentarians in an online platform to represent ourselves. So you're talking about there's not enough centralization, and there's a lot of pressure on people to not say what they really feel. Why not use an anonymous platform to forward this?
You're talking about an anonymous platform to...
Anonymous platform can be a platform that's anonymous, and we can authenticate it with everyone's NRC number to prove that they are legitimate Singapore citizen. I'm trying to get this going, and I need support from everyone in the audience and the panelists.
Right. So you're saying apart from, so that means we don't think about elected representatives. We just have an
Yeah, fuck
online
that shit.
system.
Yeah, correct. Fuck
Okay.
that shit.
Okay. All right. So yes. What are your? Maybe Joshua, you want to start first with the question on national education. What was
Yeah.
it that?
national education seems to be a common subject in different country, but I would say that under one party dictatorship, whole of the national education school curriculum is just the curriculum that try to embrace the communist and it will not allow to mention about the Tiananmen Square incident or any problem or the disadvantage or negative influence of Communist Party of China. So instead of forcing every student to show their loyalty to Beijing, it's necessary for us to decide the education system by ourselves other than the interference of Beijing. And so it's the starting point for us because what Hong Kongers would believe is even not everyone is care about politics. But why we choose the immigrants or live in Hong Kong is because we hope to maintain the uniqueness of Hong Kong compared to mainland China. If the system in Hong Kong is totally in the education field is just similar or same as China, and Hong Kong will not be Hong Kong anymore, and it's just named as Hong Kong. Yeah, and it's the trigger and the starting point for me.
Thank you. Kirsten, Steelen, you have any responses to the questions just now?
The question of backlash is very interesting. I mean, it is actually part of a lot of social movement strategy to not so much provoke, but to factor in backlash into their strategy. So, uh, like for example, during the civil rights movement in the U.S., the black students decided that the first action that they were going to take was to desegregate the lunch counters. So it used to be that black people and white people could not literally could not eat at the same lunch counter, and so they thought the first step to push civil rights is to desegregate the lunch counter and say this is ridiculous. Why can't we just sit next to each other and eat? Why is it that black people cannot go into a diner and expect to be served because we are not allowed to sit at the counter? So what they did was actually months and months of training, getting black students to just go and occupy the seats at the lunch counters. And they did it in a strategic way so that at first, a lot of the restaurant owners would rather choose to close shop than serve them. So they would just go and sit in the counters, and then the owners would close shop, and they just kept doing it until the restaurant owners were like, "I'm gonna go out of business if I close shop every single time they come." So that escalated, and they said it got to a point where the police would literally come and drag them away, but the police would not arrest them right away. The police would allow the white mobs to beat them up first, then arrest them. So they actually then factored that into their plan because they said if we keep doing this and if we are constantly non-violent and we are not, hurting anybody, we just want to sit here. After a while, they factored in that this backlash was actually helping them because it just looked so cruel and so unjust. And they were just, all they were asking was to sit at the lunch counter. And they would do it again and again. So, like, one row of students would be dragged away and beaten up, and the police will arrest them. And when the police come back, there's a new row of students sitting there. And they would do it. They would go in, like, prepare in groups of 5. So, like, 5 groups of 5. So the first 5 would sit, then they're dragged away. Then the second group comes and sit. And they just kept doing it day after day. And after a while, they said you feel the tide is turning because people are like, why are they just beating up these black kids all the time? And so it became normal first, like it became normal to see the black students sitting there, and people then realized, they're not violent, they just want to buy lunch. And it became normal, and then because it became normal, it then became unjust to see them being dragged away and beaten up. So I don't actually know if there's like a trigger point of like when exactly is backlash good or bad, but I kind of feel that normalizing it is important. And for the thing about the voting, the anonymous voting, I think that's a good idea for opinion polling, but I have a bit of reservation if you're actually proposing that as a form of government because one issue of democracy is that minority rights need to be protected as well. And if it was all completely run by referendum, then we run that risk of majoritarian rule where like if the majority says that all gay people should be locked up, then if that's the result of your online polling, does that mean that national policy is to drag away all the gay people and lock them up? Like, surely that cannot be. So I do have reservations. I understand the more direct democracy thing, but I am a bit concerned about that. That's one part that needs to be ironed out.
I think I'll only respond to the one about how much is too much, or rather the backlash, right? So in my experience over all these years, I haven't seen a negative, like a backlash really. I've seen a more opening up of space. On the other hand, like in the start, we keep getting arrested, we had to go to prison, and it was civil disobedience, and then later on, Speaker's Corner was liberalized, while we were at the height of conducting civil disobedience. So what was the strategy there by the government, you know? And then the demonstration started moving to the park, as did we. See, and on the other hand, there's also demonstration that myself and Kai Xiong held outside the Ministry of Manpower. Like we didn't think um, we didn't think that the government would take action. We just needed to make a stand, and and due to the media, international media shaming the Singapore government, they actually retracted and retreated, and they stopped kicking out Burmese activists from Singapore. So how can we assess at that moment? I'm not sure, because I'm not a politician, and I probably never will be. Uh, so I think assessment is is a whole nother realm. Then the last one is about the One Nation Under Lee film. Like 1 week before I was going to complete the film, a very close friend of mine told me, "Sealan, don't do this. Just stop now. Don't. You know, your life will change." And so then I put out the film, and my life did change, but actually for the better, because even almost every year, right, I get a young Singaporean who's like 17 or 18 years old coming up to me and said, "Hey, yeah," or online they say like, "I watched your film, One Nation Under Lee," and that was the first film that kind of opened up my eyes to the broader picture. And now these young people are, volunteering in organizations, coming to demonstrations, and I think so, yeah, how much is too much, right? Yeah, One Nation Under Lee for that time, it was possibly too much, right? Because Martin C was still making documentaries, um, but not necessarily a political act using a film. So how do you even address this? I'm not sure. For myself, as an artist, right? Um, my only means of assessment is right now. I've understood this feeling is humiliation. Like throughout the course of my career, I've been humiliated many times, and I finally understand what this emotion is, and I kind of feed off it um, now, because um, it is what makes me what I am. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, how much is too much? I guess you won't know until you actually try and push. And then that's when we will find out. I guess that's the nature of social change. So, Joshua, do you have any like final comments or remarks that you'd like to make before we close off?
Okay. In the end of this forum, I would just hope to show my support to the civil society in Singapore. We would know that there's a lot of diversity, contradiction, and even limitation for Hong Kongers to support the human rights or democratization in Singapore. But as I would like to mention about one of the youth alliance we have found in on this April. On this April, actually, we have found a youth alliance. It named as a Network of Young Democratic Asians, and it's a youth alliance with representatives from 7 countries, including Hong Kong, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam. And it's alliance for the youth activism leader, and to form this alliance to show the solidarity of the activists in Southeast Asia or South Asia that support human rights and freedom. and I hope next year can invite some of the representative from Singapore to join our alliance, because it's necessary for us to show our solidarity. No matter Hong Kong and Singapore, we also face government will use the similar strategy that related to the electoral authoritarian regime to suppress the activism. But it's still a long-term battle, and I hope to share and exchange more experience of Hong Kong, and to continually show my support to the human rights movement in Singapore. And thank you for you guys' invitation. And I hope maybe in the future or next year, this kind of forum I can participate more, and one day I can come to Singapore to share my experience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. But can I ask, your this young network, how young do you have to be? Because I do think of myself as being young, but but maybe in your network I'm an old man of 36. So is there some kind of an age requirement for this network that you guys have formed?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's all right.
I
Okay,
don't know
we
what
can
can I say, but
discuss this another time. But so okay, yeah. So thank you very much all of you for coming, and
okay,
please
thank you.
a big thank you to Joshua for joining us. A round of applause, and
Uh,
also
by the
to
way,
our speakers
by,
Kirsten and Seelan for sharing their experiences and insights. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Joshua. Bye bye.
and yeah, thank you. And one point I would like to add finally is uh I use Chinese to write on my write on Facebook, but I will use English to operate my Twitter account. And my Twitter account is Joshua Wong CF, JOSHUAWONGCF. So please follow my Twitter, and it will have more updates and
Yes,
about the
yes, we
situation in
certainly
Hong
will.
Kong. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you, Joshua.
Yeah.